Think about the last time someone hurt you. Not shouted, not exploded, just did something quietly harmful. And afterward, you kept thinking about it. You replayed conversations. You wondered if you misunderstood. You asked yourself if you were being too sensitive. Now compare that to a different kind of person. Someone who lashes out, gets angry, creates scenes. With them, you know something is wrong immediately. Both types hurt people, but only one of them leaves you questioning yourself. That difference matters, because when we talk about psychopaths and sociopaths, we're not talking about villains. We're talking about two very different ways harm shows up in everyday life. Part 1. The difference you don't notice. People use the words psychopath and sociopath like insults. Someone lies, psychopath. Someone loses their temper, sociopath. But psychology doesn't work like that. These words don't describe single behaviors, they describe patterns. And when we mix them up, we miss what's actually dangerous. Because danger isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it looks reasonable. What psychology is really pointing to. Psychology today doesn't officially walk around diagnosing people as psychopaths or sociopaths in casual life. Instead, it looks at antisocial patterns. Patterns where someone consistently disregards others, violates emotional or social rules, and doesn't respond to harm the way most people do. Within those patterns, two very different styles appear. One is controlled, the other is unstable. Both can hurt people, but they do it differently. And if you don't understand the difference, you may trust the wrong warning signs. The core difference. Here's the simplest way to understand it. Psychopaths are emotionally cold and controlled. Sociopaths are emotionally intense and unstable. Psychopaths rarely lose control. Sociopaths lose control often. Psychopaths plan. Sociopaths react. Psychopaths stay calm under pressure. Sociopaths are overwhelmed by it. This difference affects how long damage lasts, how visible harm is, and how victims feel afterward. Psychopaths create confusion. Sociopaths create chaos. And confusion is more dangerous than chaos because you don't recognize it as harm right away. Why confusion is harder to escape. Chaos triggers alarms. When someone screams, insults, or explodes, your nervous system reacts. You know something is wrong. Confusion is quieter. Confusion sounds like, maybe I misunderstood. They didn't mean it that way. Maybe I'm overthinking. Confusion turns your attention inward. Chaos pushes it outward. And when your attention turns inward, you start questioning yourself instead of the situation. That's why understanding this difference matters, not to label people, but to trust your perception earlier. A subtle but important shift. When people hear the word psychopath, they think of violence. But violence is not the defining feature. The defining feature is lack of emotional consequence. When people hear sociopath, they think of recklessness. But recklessness is not the core either. The core is lack of emotional regulation. One doesn't feel much, the other feels too much. And that emotional difference explains everything else. To really understand this difference, we need to look beneath behavior. We need to look at how emotions actually work inside their minds. Because the way someone feels or doesn't feel changes every decision they make. Part 2. How they experience emotions. Most people judge others by actions. What they said, what they did, what went wrong. But psychology looks deeper. It asks a different question. What was happening emotionally when that action happened? Because two people can do the same harmful thing for completely different emotional reasons, and that difference matters more than we realize. The emotional baseline. Let's start with something simple. Every person has an emotional baseline. For some people, emotions are intense. For others, emotions are muted. For most, they fall somewhere in between. Psychopaths and sociopaths sit at opposite ends of that spectrum. One experiences too little emotion, the other experiences too much emotion. Everything else flows from that. Inside the psychopath's emotional world, a psychopath does not experience emotions the way you do. They don't feel guilt that weighs on the chest, shame that makes you replay moments, empathy that creates hesitation. This doesn't mean they don't understand emotions. They do. They know what sadness looks like. They know when an apology is expected. They know what fear sounds like, but they don't feel the emotional weight behind it. Think of emotions like internal signals. For most people, those signals guide behavior. For a psychopath, the signals are faint or absent. So decisions are not emotionally expensive. Hurting someone doesn't cost them internally the way it costs you. Why psychopaths appear calm under pressure. This emotional flatness creates an illusion. Psychopaths often appear composed in crisis, unshaken by conflict, confident under pressure. People mistake this for strength. But it's not resilience, it's absence. They don't panic because panic requires fear. They don't hesitate because hesitation requires guilt. This is why they can do things that emotionally overwhelm others and walk away unaffected. Emotions as imitation, not experience. Here's where people get confused. Psychopaths can display emotions convincingly. They observe people carefully. They learn which expressions earn trust. They copy them, not instinctively, strategically. When they apologize, they are not releasing guilt. They are performing a function. And performance, when done well, is convincing. This is why people say, they seemed sincere, they cried, they sounded genuine. Expression is not experience, and confusing the two is dangerous. Inside the sociopath's emotional world. Now let's talk about sociopaths. Unlike psychopaths, sociopaths feel emotions strongly, too strongly. Anger rises fast, frustration escalates quickly, jealousy becomes overwhelming. The issue is not lack of emotion, it's lack of control. Their emotional system is unstable, so when something triggers them, logic disappears. They act first, they regret later. This is why sociopaths often lash out, say things they don't mean, sabotage relationships. And afterward, they may genuinely feel bad. They may apologize sincerely. But without regulation, the pattern repeats. Why sociopaths seem more human? Sociopaths often seem more relatable. They show pain, they show regret, they suffer visibly. This makes people believe they're trying, they didn't mean it, they feel bad, so they'll change. And that belief keeps people stuck, because emotion alone doesn't create change. Regulation does. Feeling remorse without control still results in harm. The emotional divide clearly stated. Let's say this plainly. Psychopaths hurt without emotional disturbance. Sociopaths hurt with emotional overflow. Psychopaths don't feel bad afterward. Sociopaths often do. Psychopaths are emotionally quiet. Sociopaths are emotionally loud. And this difference shapes how people experience them. With psychopaths, you feel confused. With sociopaths, you feel drained. How this difference traps empathetic people. Empathetic people assume others feel the way they do. So when someone expresses regret, they believe change is coming. That works with emotionally healthy people. It does not work with unstable emotional systems. With psychopaths, there is no internal break. With sociopaths, the break exists but fails. Empathy becomes a vulnerability when it's not matched with boundaries. Subtle emotional red flags. This isn't about diagnosing, it's about noticing patterns. With psychopaths, you may notice emotional coldness during serious moments, calm reactions where concern should appear, logic replacing empathy. With sociopaths, you may notice intense emotional reactions, repeated apologies without lasting change, escalating conflicts. One lacks emotional depth, the other lacks emotional control. Both matter. Emotions explain why these patterns exist, but they don't explain how they play out in real life. For that, we need to talk about control and impulse, about patience versus reaction, because this difference determines who blends in and who eventually self-destructs. Part 3. Control versus impulse. Some people react immediately, others wait. That difference alone explains why psychopaths and sociopaths move through the world so differently, because emotion is only half the story. The other half is control. Why control matters more than intention. People often say, they didn't mean to hurt anyone. But intention doesn't prevent damage. Control does. Two people can feel anger. One restrains it, the other releases it. The outcome is completely different. This is where psychopaths and sociopaths diverge sharply. The psychopath's relationship with control. Psychopaths rarely act on impulse, not because they are disciplined, but because impulsivity offers them nothing. They are patient. They can delay gratification easily. They can wait for the right moment. They can tolerate boredom. This allows them to observe people over time, study weaknesses, plan strategically. They don't rush. If something doesn't benefit them immediately, they simply wait. This is why many psychopaths rise slowly in organizations, appear dependable, gain trust over long periods. They don't force control, they let others hand it over. Calm is not the same as safe. This is one of the biggest misunderstandings. People trust calmness. We associate calm with maturity, with stability, with safety. But calm can also come from emotional absence. Psychopaths don't escalate because escalation is inefficient. They don't argue emotionally. They don't lose composure publicly. Instead, they remain composed while quietly reshaping situations to their advantage. This is why their harm often goes unnoticed for a long time. The sociopath's relationship with impulse. Sociopaths struggle with impulse control. Their emotions rise quickly and overwhelm their ability to pause. When triggered, they act. They say things they later regret. They make decisions that cost them relationships or stability. They escalate conflicts unnecessarily. Unlike psychopaths, they don't plan harm. They react to it. This is why sociopaths often get into repeated conflicts, lose opportunities, attract chaos. Their behavior is visible, and visibility brings consequences. Why sociopaths self-sabotage? Because sociopaths act in the moment, they often damage their own lives. They burn bridges. They ruin trust. They invite scrutiny. They may feel remorse later. But by then, the damage is done. This creates a cycle: emotional reaction, regret, apology, repeat. And people around them stay hopeful because the regret looks real. Long-term damage versus short-term damage? Here's the critical distinction. Sociopaths cause short-term damage, loud conflicts, visible harm, immediate fallout. Psychopaths cause long-term damage, slow manipulation, emotional erosion, power imbalance. Sociopaths destroy moments. Psychopaths destroy trajectories. One explodes, the other infiltrates. Why psychopaths blend in and sociopaths stand out? Control determines visibility. Psychopaths regulate behavior carefully. They blend into social systems. Sociopaths cannot regulate consistently. They stand out. This is why psychopaths are often described as charming, competent, reliable, and sociopaths are described as difficult, volatile, unstable. It's not morality, it's control. How this plays out in everyday life. At work, a psychopath waits, observes, positions themselves carefully. A sociopath reacts to criticism, clashes with authority, undermines themselves. In relationships, a psychopath withdraws control subtly, reframes situations, stays composed. A sociopath argues, explodes, apologizes, repeats. Both can hurt you, but only one does it quietly. Control and impulse explain how these patterns operate, but there's one more piece. The part that determines whether you feel confused or completely drained afterward. That's how they relate to other people. Part 4. Relationships, manipulation, and why you feel the way you do. Some people leave you angry after an interaction, others leave you confused. That difference is not accidental. It comes from how they relate to other human beings. And this is where psychopaths and sociopaths create very different emotional experiences for the people around them. Why relationships reveal everything. Anyone can appear normal in short encounters, a conversation, a meeting, a first impression. But relationships expose patterns. Because relationships require emotional exchange, accountability, consistency. And this is where psychopaths and sociopaths begin to diverge clearly. The psychopath in relationships. Psychopaths do not form emotional bonds the way most people do. They don't attach emotionally. They attach strategically. At the beginning, a relationship with a psychopath often feels intense. They listen carefully. They mirror your values. They seem unusually attentive. You feel understood. But what's happening is not connection. It's information gathering. They are learning. What matters to you, what hurts you, what makes you doubt yourself. Over time, that information becomes leverage. Why you feel confused around psychopaths. Psychopaths rarely attack directly. They don't need to. Instead, they subtly shift narratives, reframe events. Stay calm while you feel emotional. You walk away thinking, maybe I misunderstood. Maybe I overreacted. Maybe this is my fault. This is not because you're weak. It's because your emotional responses are being used against your logical judgment. Psychopaths don't create chaos. They create self-doubt. The sociopath in relationships. Sociopaths relate very differently. They do attach emotionally, but the attachment is unstable. Relationships with sociopaths feel intense and dramatic. There are highs, passion, closeness, emotional intensity, and lows, anger, blame, emotional outbursts. They may hurt you impulsively and feel genuine regret afterward. They may apologize sincerely. But without emotional regulation, the pattern repeats. This creates emotional exhaustion for everyone involved. Why you feel drained around sociopaths. With sociopaths, you don't doubt reality. You feel tired. You're always reacting. Calming them, reassuring them, bracing for the next explosion. The relationship becomes about managing their emotions. You are not confused. You are depleted. Manipulation styles. Quiet versus loud. Both patterns can be manipulative, but the style is different. Psychopaths manipulate quietly, through logic, through emotional restraint, through subtle control. Sociopaths manipulate loudly, through emotional pressure, through guilt, through volatility. One uses silence, the other uses intensity. Both pull attention away from your needs. Why empathetic people get trapped. Empathetic people assume if I explain myself better, they'll understand. With healthy people, that works. With these patterns, it doesn't. Psychopaths use explanations as data. Sociopaths absorb explanations emotionally, but don't change behavior. Empathy becomes a one-way street, and the more empathetic you are, the longer you stay. A quiet warning sign. Here's a subtle question to ask yourself. After interacting with this person, do you feel clear or clouded? Clarity suggests mutual understanding. Cloudiness suggests manipulation. Psychopaths cloud perception. Sociopaths overload emotion. Both signals matter. Understanding relationships explains how harm happens. But there's still one critical question left. How do you protect yourself without becoming paranoid, cold, or shut down? That's the final piece. Part 5. Protection, boundaries, and taking your power back. Some people hear everything we've talked about and feel scared. That's not the goal. The goal is not fear. The goal is clarity. Because clarity doesn't make you anxious, it makes you grounded. And protection doesn't require becoming cold, paranoid, or shut down. It requires something much simpler. Why protection is about patterns, not people. Let's start here. This is not about diagnosing anyone. It's not about labels. It's about patterns that repeat. Healthy people feel emotions, regulate them, take responsibility. Unhealthy patterns show up when empathy doesn't exist or emotions exist without control. Protection begins the moment you stop asking, "What is wrong with them?" and start asking, "What is happening to me in this interaction?" The first rule: stop over-explaining yourself. One of the biggest mistakes empathetic people make is explaining themselves endlessly. Why they feel what they feel, why something hurt, why a boundary matters. With healthy people, explanation builds understanding. With unhealthy patterns, explanation becomes material. Psychopaths store it. Sociopaths react to it emotionally. Neither outcome protects you. Clarity doesn't require long explanations. Sometimes the safest sentence is, "I'm not comfortable with this," and then silence. The second rule: watch what happens. After you set a boundary, boundaries reveal everything. You don't need to argue. You don't need to convince. Just observe. Healthy people adjust. Psychopaths respond with cold logic, subtle guilt, emotional withdrawal. Sociopaths respond with anger, emotional pressure, dramatic reactions. The reaction tells you more than the conversation ever will. Boundaries aren't walls. They're filters. The third rule: trust your nervous system. Your body notices things before your mind does. If you feel tense without knowing why, drained after interactions, guilty without doing anything wrong, that's information, not proof, not accusation. Information. Psychopaths create confusion in the mind. Sociopaths create overload in the body. Both are signals. Ignoring them is how people stay stuck. Why you can't fix these patterns. This part is important. Empathy does not cure lack of empathy. Understanding does not create regulation. Psychopaths don't change through insight. Sociopaths don't change through reassurance. Change requires internal motivation, accountability, long-term effort. You cannot supply that for someone else. Trying to fix them slowly teaches you to abandon yourself. Distance is not cruel, it's correct. People often think distance is dramatic. It's not. Distance is data-based decision-making. Not every situation needs closure. Not every relationship needs a final conversation. Some patterns are solved quietly by stepping back. Distance protects your clarity, your energy, your sense of self, and it does so without confrontation. If you've been affected, this is not a weakness. Many people who end up in these dynamics are empathetic, thoughtful, emotionally intelligent. They assume others operate the same way. That assumption is human. It's not a flaw. But once you see the pattern, staying becomes a choice, and awareness gives you options. The final perspective. Not everyone who hurts others is a psychopath or sociopath. But when harm is repeated, when empathy is absent or uncontrolled, when confusion or exhaustion becomes your normal, the problem is not you. Understanding psychology doesn't make you suspicious. It makes you selective. You don't need to diagnose people. You only need to notice how you feel, how often patterns repeat, and whether respect exists. That's enough. Some people feel nothing. Some people feel too much. You don't need to figure out which is which. Your responsibility is simpler. Protect your peace, trust patterns over promises, and choose clarity over confusion. That's not fear, that's wisdom. If this video helped you see things more clearly, follow Clarity Hub for more psychology that actually makes sense.